Right now on Upfront.
The first 100 days.
We have delivered the most profound change.
The Trump administration moving full steam ahead, Democrats urgently trying to respond. And it's all playing out in key battleground states like Wisconsin.
We can still be civil and we can still have conversations.
This Sunday, 100 days in, the high-profile arrest of a Milwaukee County judge rippling across the nation, now at the center of the heated debate over immigration.
What happened the other day where a judge was protecting a criminal was horrible.
With us, Republican Congressman Scott Fitzgerald, member of the House Judiciary Committee, and Democratic Attorney General Josh Kaul.
Universities in the spotlight. The administration targeting college campuses, some now firing back. UW-Madison at the center of two nationwide investigations. And the Chancellor, Jennifer Mnuchin, is with us. And Swing County.
What do you think of these first 100 days of the administration?
Yeah. Voters in Sauk County, the bellwether of this battleground, talking with us about the administration and why they've been right so many times.
Sometimes I think it's old values versus new values.
100 days in, it all starts right now.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. 100 days and now counting. The Trump administration and its critics marking the moment in dramatically different terms. The president holding that rally in Michigan, Democratic attorneys general continuing to sue, and the fallout here in Wisconsin. The FBI arresting Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan, accused of helping an undocumented migrant evade immigration agents as the administration touts an immigration crackdown.
This Sunday, we'll get to it all, from Capitol Hill to the state capitol, college campuses across the state, and what voters in a key battleground county are saying. Let's begin with Republican Congressman Scott Fitzgerald, a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
I want to first start with your role on judiciary. I'm curious, when we look at the arrest here in Milwaukee County that's making national headlines of Judge Hannah Dugan, first, your initial thoughts on that arrest, and was it necessary the way it went down, hauling her out in handcuffs out of the county courthouse?
Yeah, I know the optics were certainly strong, and I think many of my colleagues that have seen it were wondering if it had to be handled that way. But you know, not all crime is premeditated, and what Judge Dugan did is outrageous. And I think everything that's happened since then has been appropriate, including what the Wisconsin Supreme Court has now done with taking action as well. So I know these cases are very emotional, but a judge is certainly expected to be the level head in the room no matter what is going on within that courthouse. And it's disappointing what happened.
Do you see the Judiciary Committee weighing in on the Dugan case at all specifically, or any other case involving judges nationwide right now?
You know, there's been a lot of discussion with Chairman Jordan about that. I don't think anything has really kind of fully developed to the point where Congress would be weighing in on anything specific. But certainly it falls under our purview if there are some things that emerge nationally for us to take a look at. You know, we'll see where all this is headed.
Congressman, back in your old stomping grounds in the Capitol, some Republicans are calling for the legislature to remove Judge Dugan, former Governor Walker, Congressman Tony Weed. Would you like to see that happen at this moment?
I'm actually surprised how far the Wisconsin Supreme Court went. So they're, as they weigh the facts and as they take a look at it, it's clearly something that falls under their purview.
Speaker Vos said from the legislative perspective, they're going to wait until a conviction if that were to happen. Would you direct Republicans or encourage Republicans to wait or move now?
No, I think they should wait. Certainly any type of knee-jerk reaction that puts a judge in a position where they've actually committed a crime certainly needs to be scrutinized and reviewed at length, and it looks like the Wisconsin Supreme Court is doing that right now.
You recently held a lively town hall in your home district. What was your takeaway from the town hall and what you heard from voters in your district?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were kind of out there doing our regular office hours that we've done since I've done for 30 years as an elected official. And, you know, I went through some of the some of the larger, more vocal groups after Act 10 when we were doing office hours. So it's not something that I'm not used to, but in a couple of the locations we were at, yeah, people were a little bit over the top, people, using swear words and such. I don't like that because it makes law enforcement nervous. And when law enforcement is nervous, then I get nervous. So, but we have a lot of requests. People are calling the office asking about scheduling some in the future. And as the congressional calendar allows us, we'll get back to it at some point here.
So you do plan on holding in-person town halls like that again in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's something that comes with the job. It's, when you're at a fever pitch on something like what we're going through right now with the big shakeup in D.C., you just want to make sure that people are respectful and that they're not yelling over the top of their own neighbors as they try to express themselves as well.
Republican Congressman Scott Fitzgerald from Waukesha County. Congressman, like always, thank you.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Democratic attorneys general from across the country, including Josh Kaul here in Wisconsin, aggressively suing the Trump administration in these first 100 days. The latest lawsuit, a coalition of states suing over the administration's DEI demands, threatening to withhold federal funding if schools don't eliminate certain diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Another lawsuit targets sweeping cuts to AmeriCorps, the federal agency focused on volunteering. Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Kaul is among those suing, and he joins us now. Attorney General, welcome back to Upfront.
Thanks for having me.
So a number of lawsuits that Wisconsin is now involved in. Is this effective, and how would you characterize the first 100 days of this Trump administration?
Well, I think they have been effective. First of all, I think it's important to talk about where we are with the federal government. We have seen a reckless, out-of-control federal government with Donald Trump and Elon Musk basically taking a wrecking ball to critical federal programs that people rely on, and often without any understanding of the impact that those cuts are going to have or on the way that they're going to work to address the cuts that are happening. These lawsuits have been a critical tool in helping us stop the most egregious harms from happening.
There's a lot of lawsuits. Do you know how many Wisconsin is involved in top of mind?
We're in over a dozen suits right now, and they have continued to increase. As you just mentioned, 2 of them were recently filed.
I mean, is there a risk that all of this just becomes white noise, or is this the only option for Democrats?
Well, right now, this is one of the central areas where there's pushback to what the Trump administration is doing. Republicans have a majority in the House and the Senate. Of course, Trump is the president. And so these suits have been a critical measure in limiting some of the damage that's going on from what's happening at the White House. So it's important that people continue to speak up against these policies, and ultimately that members of Congress of both parties stand up against these cuts that can be devastating for families here in Wisconsin and around the country.
As the state's attorney general, I want to ask about the FBI arresting Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan. First, your initial reaction to the arrest itself and how it went down playing out inside of the county courthouse.
Well, I've been asked on this program about criminal cases before, and when we're talking about criminal cases, I think it's important that the cases be litigated in a court of law and not the court of public opinion. So I'm not going to comment on any details relating to that case. What I can say is we have a very effective justice system in this country, and the facts will come out as the case moves forward. And I have full confidence that the outcome will be based on the facts and the law, and that there will be a fair process in place.
The state Supreme Court recently issued the order to suspend her temporarily. Was that the right move?
Well, I think what's important for folks to note is I don't think that order in any way, and I don't speak for the justices certainly, but I don't think that order in any way is meant to provide any indication as to what that means about the merits of the underlying case. I think that was something that was done sort of routinely, just given the circumstances.
Is there any scenario where your office gets involved in this case in any fashion?
It's very early in the case right now, so we're going to see how things develop. If the state of Wisconsin ends up having an interest in the case, it's possible that we would, but it's going to depend on the circumstances that arise.
Here in the state, related somewhat, but not related, there's been a lot of talk about this guidance the governor issued related to ICE and agents in state buildings. There's been questions about whether this guidance was legal coming from Republicans. I'm curious your take on that guidance that the governor has issued.
I have to say, I'm surprised that this has received as much pushback as it had. As I understand it, the governor has suggested that if ICE comes somewhere, that the state agency should make sure to get their attorneys involved in the process. That's a reasonable thing that I think anybody would suggest in this circumstance. Having attorneys work the process to make sure that things are done lawfully, that the rights of state citizens are protected, because the state government, of course, has a lot of confidential and private data regarding state citizens. That's just common sense. So I think this is an effort to politicize what is really a common sense move from the Evers administration.
So you're comfortable with this guidance?
Yes.
Democratic Attorney General Josh Kaul, Attorney General, like always, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, changes on college campuses nationwide. The Trump administration launching investigations, including at UW-Madison, research funding already cut. Now UW's Chancellor Jennifer Mnuchin is standing by to respond. With us next.